We both felt that in the studio. Of course, at first it was like we were meeting for the first time.
When Dave Gahan finally spoke out in late 2024, fans around the world were left stunned. For more than 4 decades, Depeche Mode's frontman had lived a life filled with music, pain, and survival. But now, at 63, he admitted something people had suspected for years. That behind all the fame and noise, he'd been searching for peace, not applause. The man once called the dark soul of Depeche Mode revealed that every song, every scream, every move on stage was really a cry for help and healing. His life had been a battle between destruction and redemption. A fight that began long before the band even existed. When he finally confirmed the truth, it wasn't about success or money. It was about how music had saved him from himself. Fans who had followed his every move realized that what they always felt in his voice, the sadness, the fire, the raw emotion, had been real all along. It wasn't just performance. It was confession through music. Dave Gahan was born on May 9, 1962, in Epping, Essex, England. But his childhood was anything but peaceful. His parents, Sylvia and Len Calcott, were working-class people trying to survive the hard years after World War II. His mother worked on London buses, while his father, who had Malaysian roots, also drove buses. When Dave was only 6 months old, his father left without saying a word. Sylvia was suddenly left alone to raise baby Dave and his older sister Sue. A few years later, she married a kind man named Jack Gahan, who gave Dave his last name and love like a real father. But tragedy struck again when Jack died suddenly when Dave was just 9. That loss broke him deeply. He later said he felt like his world had ended twice. Once when his real father left, and again when the man he loved as his father was gone. Not long after, Len, his biological father, showed up again. One day, Dave came home to find a strange man sitting in the living room, and his mother said, "This is your real dad." Dave refused to believe it. "That's impossible," he said. "My father is dead." For a year, Len tried to be part of their lives, and then vanished once again. 2 father figures both gone. It left a wound that shaped Dave's anger, distrust, and rebellion for years to come. By the time Dave reached his teenage years, the anger inside him had turned into rebellion. He went to Barnstable School in Basildon, but his behavior quickly spiraled out of control. He skipped classes, fought teachers, and started hanging out with the wrong crowd. He loved the rush of doing dangerous things, breaking windows, painting graffiti, and worst of all, stealing cars just to race and burn them for fun. He later admitted, "I love the excitement of stealing a motor, screeching off, and being chased by the police." By 16, he had already been in juvenile court 3 times. One day, after being denied a job because of his record, he stormed into his probation officer's office and destroyed everything inside. That act almost landed him in prison. The court gave him one last chance. Every Saturday for a year, he had to report to a correctional center. He spent those days cutting hair short, boxing, and doing hard labor. The message was clear: one more mistake, and he was going to jail. But destiny had other plans. Behind the anger and chaos, there was a young man waiting to discover something that would completely change his life. Music. In March 1980, Dave's life took a turn he never saw coming. He went to a local scout hut in Basildon for a small jam session, not knowing that this ordinary day would change his future forever. Inside, he sang David Bowie's Heroes, a song that would later define how people saw him. A survivor who kept rising against all odds. Among the small group that day was Vince Clarke, who had just started a band called Composition of Sound. Vince was impressed by Dave's voice. It wasn't trained, but it was powerful, raw, and full of emotion. He immediately asked Dave to join the band. That single moment took Dave off the path of crime and set him on the road to becoming one of the most iconic frontmen in music history. Later that year, Dave came up with a name for the band after seeing it in a French magazine, Depeche Mode, meaning fashion news. The name stuck, and history began. In just a few months, the band went from small club gigs to becoming one of the most talked-about acts in London's underground scene. Dave, who once stood in front of judges and police officers, now stood under bright lights in front of crowds that adored him. Depeche Mode's rise was nothing short of meteoric. In late 1980, during one of their London shows, a man named Daniel Miller from Mute Records noticed their unique sound. He offered them a deal, and they turned down a much larger offer from another label because they wanted creative freedom. Their first hit, Just Can't Get Enough, made them stars almost overnight. The song reached the UK charts, and suddenly Dave was performing on national TV. The same kid who once faced a judge for stealing cars. But fame came with its own kind of danger. As the band grew, so did Dave's wildness. He had tasted adrenaline on the streets, and now he found it on stage. His performances were electric, part punk, part preacher, full of energy. Fans loved him, but behind the flashing lights, he was losing himself. The late nights, the constant tours, and the pressure to keep performing all began to wear him down. By the mid-1980s, Depeche Mode wasn't just a band anymore. It was a movement, a sound that captured the darkness and beauty of modern life. And at the center of it all was Dave Gahan, the man who could make pain sound like poetry. As Depeche Mode became a global name, Dave's life off stage began to crumble. The endless tours and fame brought loneliness, and that loneliness soon turned into something more dangerous: addiction. The same drive that once made him fearless on stage now led him down a darker road. He started experimenting with drugs, seeking escape from the pressure and emptiness he felt inside. The success of albums like Black Celebration and Music for the Masses made the band legends. But for Dave, every performance became harder. By the late 1980s, his addiction was no longer a secret. His friends noticed his weight loss, his mood swings, and his unpredictability. Yet, when he stepped on stage, something magical happened. His pain became his power. Songs like Stripped and Never Let Me Down Again weren't just hits. They were reflections of his own struggles. Fans connected with him because they felt what he felt: isolation, pain, and hope. Even when he seemed broken, he had the strength to stand up and sing. That's what made Dave Gahan different. His art came from truth, not performance. The 1990s were both the best and worst years of Dave's life. Depeche Mode released Violator and Songs of Faith and Devotion, two albums that defined an era. Songs like Enjoy the Silence and Personal Jesus turned them into superstars. But behind closed doors, Dave was falling apart. His addiction spiraled out of control, leading to several near-death experiences. In 1996, things reached a terrifying point when he overdosed in a Los Angeles hotel and was declared clinically dead for 2 minutes before being revived. It was a moment that changed him forever. He later said, "I saw my body from above. I was dead, and I knew I had to change." That experience became a turning point. He entered rehab and began the long, painful process of rebuilding his life. He knew that if he didn't stop, he would lose everything: his music, his family, his band, and his life. Slowly, with determination and faith, Dave came back. His voice grew stronger, deeper, and his performances became more emotional than ever before. Fans who once saw him as a rock star now saw him as a survivor. After surviving his darkest days, Dave began to see life differently. He started focusing on health, spirituality, and forgiveness, not just of others, but of himself. He worked on solo projects like Paper Monsters and Hourglass, which reflected his journey of healing. His lyrics spoke about rebirth, faith, and the struggle to stay human in a world that often feels cold and mechanical. At the same time, Depeche Mode continued to evolve. The band's later albums, such as Playing the Angel in Spirit, carried messages about hope, unity, and survival. Dave's voice had changed. It was no longer just the voice of rebellion, but of wisdom. Fans could hear the years of pain and experience in every word he sang. In interviews, he began to talk openly about his battles with addiction and depression. He said music wasn't just a career. It was therapy. "Every time I sing," he said, "I'm letting go of something dark inside." That honesty made fans love him even more. The man who once destroyed his life with chaos was now inspiring millions by choosing peace. In December 2024, Dave Gahan gave an interview that made headlines around the world. When asked about his long career, he smiled and said, "I spent my whole life running. From my past, from my pain, even from myself. But what I've finally learned is that Depeche Mode was never just a band. It was my way of healing." Those words confirmed what fans had always believed: that behind the mystery and darkness of Depeche Mode's music was a man trying to make sense of his own life. He admitted that the songs were more than art. They were therapy sessions turned into music. For decades, people had said they could feel real emotion in his voice, and now they knew why. After his near-death experience in 1996, Dave Gahan was not just fighting for his career, he was fighting for his soul. The man who once felt immortal now faced the truth of his own fragility. He realized that the same fire that drove him to success had nearly destroyed him. Rehab wasn't easy. There were relapses, dark days, and moments of doubt when he wondered if he could ever step on stage again. But slowly, he began to rebuild. He focused on his son Jack and his daughter Stella, finding strength in fatherhood and love. He learned to be present, something he had never done before. Music became his medicine. When he returned to the studio with Depeche Mode, his voice carried new depth. It wasn't just performance anymore. It was experience. His bandmates noticed the change. Martin Gore once said, "When Dave sings now, it feels like he's lived every word." That was the truth. Dave had become the living embodiment of his songs. Every lyric about pain, redemption, and forgiveness had come from real scars. For many bands, fame, addiction, and death usually mean the end. But Depeche Mode was different. Despite all the internal struggles, the members never turned their backs on one another completely. When Dave was lost, Martin Gore and Andy Fletcher held things together. They believed that Depeche Mode was bigger than one person's mistakes. It was a brotherhood built on survival. After Dave's recovery, the band's chemistry grew stronger. When they released Playing the Angel in 2005, fans could feel that something had changed. The album carried messages of hope, faith, and rebirth. Dave's performance on songs like Precious and Suffer Well showed that he wasn't just back. He was better than ever. The man who had once nearly destroyed himself was now leading a band that seemed reborn. Their tours drew millions of fans across continents, and the energy felt different, more mature, more spiritual. The bond between the bandmates was no longer just about music. It was about surviving life together. Depeche Mode became a symbol of endurance, proof that even in the darkest times, art can keep you alive. There's something about Dave Gahan's voice that sets him apart. It's deep, raw, and full of emotion. A sound that can be both comforting and haunting. Over the years, fans noticed that his voice aged beautifully. It didn't lose power. It gained soul. He once said, "The pain gives the voice texture." When he sings songs like Walking in My Shoes or Heaven, you can hear every struggle, every heartbreak, every ounce of growth. His performances became less about perfection and more about connection. Fans didn't come just to hear the music. They came to feel understood. Dave never pretended to be perfect. He talked openly about depression, about how some days were still hard. That honesty made him real in a world full of pretenders. People didn't just see him as a singer. They saw him as someone who had walked through fire and made it out alive. That's what made his 2024 confession so powerful. When he said that Depeche Mode was his way of healing, it wasn't just poetic. It was the truth we had all heard in his voice for years. Few artists in history have built a bond with their fans as strong as Dave Gahan's. From the beginning, Depeche Mode attracted outsiders, people who felt different, misunderstood, or broken in some way. Their dark, emotional music gave those people a home. Fans saw themselves in Dave, the rebel who had been lost, the soul who had been hurt, but who refused to give up. During concerts, that connection became almost spiritual. When Dave raises his arms during Never Let Me Down Again, tens of thousands of people lift theirs too, moving like one living organism. It's not just a concert, it's communion. Many fans have said that Depeche Mode's music helped them survive depression, addiction, or loneliness. And Dave never took that lightly. He once said, "When someone tells me that a song saved their life, I believe them, because it saved mine too." That shared understanding between artist and audience created something rare. Trust. Even after 40 years, when Dave walks on stage, the crowd doesn't just cheer. They welcome him like an old friend who's come home. For most of his early life, Dave Gahan struggled with love. He had been abandoned, hurt, and betrayed so often that he built walls around his heart. But in his later years, he learned that forgiveness was the key to peace. He learned to forgive his father for leaving, himself for his mistakes, and even life for its cruelty. His marriage to Jennifer Sklias in 1999 marked a new beginning. She stood by him through recovery, giving him a sense of stability he had never known. Together they built a life away from chaos, quiet, grounded, and full of love. Dave often talks about how she and his children became his anchor. "They remind me of who I really am," he said in one interview. This new chapter brought a softness to him that fans could feel. The man who once sang about pain and loss was now singing about peace and love. But it wasn't the shallow kind. It was the kind that comes after you've seen darkness and chosen light anyway. That's why his later performances feel deeper. They come from a man who finally understands what love truly means. Dave Gahan's journey wasn't just about survival. It was also about finding purpose. After his recovery, he started exploring spirituality, meditation, and the idea of a higher power. He wasn't religious in a traditional sense, but he believed in something greater, something that had kept him alive when he should have been gone. "There's no reason I should still be here," he once said, "so I figure someone or something still wants me around." That belief became the quiet force behind his creativity. In songs like Cover Me and Going Backwards, he explored the struggle between faith and fear. He began to see music not as a career but as a calling, a way to connect with the divine through sound. When fans asked what kept him going, he said, "Gratitude." Every day I wake up and say thank you that I get to do this again.